Sometimes it feels like you're not just a teenager at this age, but a raw nerve. The world sounds louder than it should. Words cut deeper. Looks are too clear. Jung called this the moment of meeting the shadow, when everything that was previously dormant rises within. For an empath, this encounter happens especially early and especially painfully. At 14 or 15, an empath suddenly realizes, they're not like everyone else. Not because they're better or worse, but because they feel too much. Other people's moods creep into them without a hitch. A classmate's joy lifts them, a teacher's aggression throws them off balance, family conflicts feel as if they're happening inside their chest. And then the first trigger appears, the thought, something's wrong with me. Gradually, a mask emerges. Jung called it the persona. The empath learns to smile when they're empty inside, to be normal when everything inside is screaming. They become comfortable, quiet, understanding. They're praised for their maturity, but rarely asked how they really are. And at this point, they can begin to lose touch with themselves, without even realizing it. At 16, a fatigue often sets in that's hard to explain. Not from studying or from people in particular, but from the constant pressure of being on. The empath tires of feelings. From constantly picking up signals. From not being able to switch off. And then the desire to hide arises, in music, in fantasy, in solitude. This isn't weakness. It's the psyche's attempt to save itself. Somewhere nearby, the fear of rejection arises. The empath senses that if they show true emotions, they might not be understood. And so they begin to suppress themselves. Some become too quiet, others, on the contrary, harsh and sarcastic. This is how the shadow searches for an outlet. This is how repressed feelings begin to pound from within. At 17 or 18, empaths often feel like they're living someone else's life. Choices loom, who to be, where to go, what to become. And inside, there's a fog. Because they've been taught their whole lives to feel others, but not themselves. And at this point, an important insight can be born: pain isn't an enemy. It's a signal. It says, you've lost touch with yourself. Jung said that growing up is a path of individuation. For an empath, this means learning to distinguish between what's theirs and what's not. Understanding that not every emotion needs to be carried. Not every pain needs to be saved. And you're not responsible for everyone. This knowledge doesn't come immediately, it grows through mistakes, tears, and disappointments. Sometimes at this age, an empath encounters toxic people for the first time. Those who sense their sensitivity and unconsciously exploit it. This is a difficult but important experience. It teaches boundaries. And boundaries for an empath aren't coldness, but a form of self-love. The most valuable thing an empath can hear at 14 or 18 is, you're okay. You're not broken. You just feel things more deeply. And if you learn to harness that depth, it won't be a burden, but a strength. The ability to understand, to see, to feel life more fully. This age isn't about fixing yourself. It's about facing yourself honestly for the first time. And if you're going through this transition right now, know this: you're not alone. You're going through an important stage. The one where sensitivity gives birth to awareness. And pain gives birth to true inner support. Sometimes, after the initial insights, silence comes. Not calm, strange. As if someone had turned down the volume inside you so you could finally hear yourself. For an empath, this is unusual and even frightening. After all, if you don't feel others so keenly, the question remains, who am I without this? And here a new stage begins, an acquaintance not with the world, but with your own depth. At this age, a feeling of old age often emerges within a young body. The empath feels as if they understood life too early. They see falsehoods, sense the tension between the lines, grasp what others don't yet recognize. This can cause loneliness. But it is precisely here that the observer archetype is born, the one who sees a little further and feels a little deeper. Sometimes guilt overwhelms. For wanting to be alone. For not having the strength to support everyone. For wanting to say no. This guilt is an old trigger, rooted in childhood, where love was often confused with the obligation to be convenient. Recognizing this is already a step toward freedom. Sometimes an empath suddenly becomes harsh. They might use offensive words, slam the door, or push away those they previously tolerated in silence. This isn't degradation. It's the suppressed shadow coming to the surface, demanding recognition. Jung said, "What we don't accept in ourselves controls us from within." And this is especially noticeable during adolescence. At 15 or 18, an empath can experience intense, almost painful, infatuations. They dissolve in another, lose boundaries, and live on the partner's emotions. And then, an abrupt end and emptiness. These stories teach the most important lesson: love without self becomes self-destruction. And this understanding remains with them for life. Many empaths at this age seek refuge in creativity. Music, lyrics, and drawings become the language of the soul. Through them, what cannot be said out loud expresses itself. This isn't just a hobby, it's a means of survival. The psyche thus seeks balance between the inner storm and external reality. Sometimes it feels like the world is cruel, like people aren't hearing, feeling, or noticing. At this point, it's easy to shut down and decide, "I don't want to be so sensitive." But sensitivity isn't a mistake. The mistake is trying to become someone else in order to survive. Closer to 18, an empath may experience a strange calm. Not always stable, but real. They begin to distinguish between their own emotions and the reflection of others. They still make mistakes, they still stumble, but they already feel the ground beneath their feet. These are the first signs of inner support. Jung called this the moment when a person stops running from themselves. When the shadow is no longer an enemy, but a source of strength. For an empath, this means accepting their vulnerability as part of their wholeness, not as a flaw. And if you're reading this now and recognizing yourself, know this path isn't quick or linear. But it's real. You don't have to understand everything right now. One thing is enough: not betraying your sensitivity. Because it's through it that you will one day begin to live your own life, not someone else's. If these words suddenly touched something quiet within, not necessarily pain, perhaps light, it means you truly hear deeper than you think. If you resonate, support the channel with a subscription or a warm message. Your response is the living energy that continues to create stories for those who sense this world more subtly and deeply. Over time, the empath begins to notice something strange. Their reactions become softer, but deeper. They no longer explode at every word, but can carry what has offended them inside for a long time. This is not a disappearance of feelings, but a deepening. The psyche learns not to defend itself by flight, but to process. This is where the beginnings of inner maturity emerge, which is often invisible from the outside. Sometimes a fear of emptiness overwhelms. As if you stop constantly feeling others, there will be nothing inside. This is an illusion. It's just that previously, this nothing was occupied by other people's emotions. Jung would say that this is the space for meeting the self, that core that is independent of others' expectations. At this age, the empath may begin to ask uncomfortable questions. What do I want? Why do I feel bad around some people? Why do I always try to be good? These questions are disturbing because there are no quick answers. But they are precisely what trigger the process of inner maturation. Sometimes an empath suddenly realizes that their fatigue isn't from life, but from constant self-denial. From the habit of being strong when it hurts. Understanding when they want to scream. And at that moment, a resolution can come: to be alive, not to be right. It's a quiet but revolutionary thought. An interest in psychology, philosophy, and meaning emerges. Not out of curiosity, but out of an inner need. The empath searches for words for their experience, so they can finally stop feeling strange. And when they find similar descriptions, relief comes. I'm not alone. Someone has been through this before. Sometimes the past suddenly surfaces in flashes, old grievances, scenes, words. This isn't regression. It's the psyche maturing to process them. The shadow rises not to destroy, but to be seen. And the more honest this gaze, the less power it has. At this age, a strange feeling can emerge, self-respect. Still fragile, still uncertain, but real. The empath begins to value their depth rather than be ashamed of it. They are still vulnerable, but no longer ready to give themselves to those who treat them carelessly. Sometimes they choose solitude not out of pain, but out of awareness. Not because no one understands, but because silence becomes a resource. In this silence, their own thoughts, desires, and directions are born. This is an important shift, from survival to life. Jung said that a person becomes whole not when they rid themselves of darkness, but when they stop fighting it. For an empath, this is especially important. Their sensitivity is not only light, but also deep night. And both parts deserve their place. And if you're at this age now and you feel a slow, painful, but real process going on inside, that's growth. Not the kind others see, but the kind that will one day make you yourself. Without masks. Without guilt. With a living, genuine heart. Over time, the empath notices that they no longer want to save everyone. This discovery is frightening at first. It seems as if kindness is leaving with it. But in reality, the old role is disappearing, the role of someone who sacrifices themselves to earn love. In its place, a quiet sense of dignity begins to form. At this age, the understanding comes, someone else's pain is not always your responsibility. You can empathize, be there, but you don't have to dissolve. This knowledge doesn't make you cold, it makes you alive. For the first time, the empath feels where we ends and I begins. Sometimes, sadness arises without cause. Not sharp, not dramatic, deep. It's a farewell to illusions. With the hope that one day everyone will be kind, honest, and considerate. This sadness is part of growing up. It makes room for a realistic view of the world, without rose-colored filters and self-deception. The empath begins to feel their body. They notice where there is tension, where there is fatigue, where they want to stop. This is a significant shift, from living in one's head and emotions to being present here and now. This is how a support system is formed that doesn't depend on others' reactions. At some point, one realizes one can be alone without feeling lonely. This isn't isolation, but connection with oneself. Silence ceases to be an enemy. There's no emptiness in it, there's depth. Jung wrote that wholeness comes when a person stops running from their own nature. For an empath, this means stopping proving themselves normal, convenient, strong. And allowing themselves to be sensitive, without excuses. The ability to choose people emerges. Not out of fear of being alone, but out of self-respect. The empath begins to sense who drains them and who fulfills them. And for the first time, they allow themselves to leave, without scandal, without explanation, without guilt. At 17 or 18, a strange feeling may arise, I don't know anything yet, but I'm no longer lost. This isn't confidence, but self-trust. The understanding that the answers will come as you move forward, not in advance. And here, adolescence ends not with a sudden snap, but with a quiet shift. The empath emerges not hardened, but collected. Not rigid, but whole. Their sensitivity remains, but now it's a tool, not a wound. The ending of this journey is both simple and profound. You truly were fine from the very beginning. You didn't have to become different to survive. You simply learned to be yourself. And if you've completed this journey, it means you already have something within you that neither age, nor the world, nor other people's expectations can break. If this story resonated with you, write in the comments what exactly you felt. One thought, one word, one memory. Your responses are important, they create a space where more of us, those who feel more deeply, can grow. Support the channel by liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching.